The twin suns of Vetranine set behind the hills like glowing embers, swallowed by the dark sky as Rex sat quietly on the wooden steps of his small house. The fields in front of him swayed gently in the breeze, and the air smelled of dust and dry grass. Behind him the lights of the home were warm and peaceful, and soft laughter came from the kitchen where his daughter, Lena, hummed while cooking dinner. It was a quiet life, and for the last few years it had been enough for him. The war was far behind him now. At least he hoped it was. Rex had once been the most feared human in the galaxy, the kind of name that leaders whispered when they spoke of battles lost and empires broken. He had no medals, no parades, no records of honor, only scars and memories he never wanted to carry. But all of that changed the day Lena came into his life. She was just a baby when he found her alone on a burned colony world he never planned to raise a child, but something in her eyes gave him purpose, and so he walked away from the blood and fire and built a quiet life on a forgotten planet where no one knew his name. But peace is never permanent, not for men like him. That night, while the wind grew colder and the sky filled with stars, Rex heard something unusual. A distant crackle in the atmosphere, a strange pulse that didn't belong. He stood up slowly, his body still strong despite the years of silence. His eyes narrowed as he scanned the dark horizon, and then it happened. A sharp flash of light, a low rumble in the ground, and a sound that froze his heart. The alarms rang. He ran inside, but the house was empty. Lena was not in the kitchen. The food on the stove was burning. A soft, high-pitched beeping echoed from the wall monitor, and when Rex hit the control panel, the screen came alive with static. Then a broken message played over and over, repeating in a harsh alien dialect he had not heard in decades. It was a warning, a message, and a challenge all in one. "We have her." He rushed outside and followed the signal trail across the fields, his boots crunching the dry soil as he ran past the old barn and up the ridge where his personal defense systems had once been buried. Long ago he had deactivated them, thinking the past would never return. But the broken wires and scorched ground told a different story. Someone had planned. This someone had known who he was and what she meant to him, and still they came at the top of the ridge. He found the mark carved deep into the rock, a jagged symbol that turned his stomach. It belonged to the Black Fang Syndicate, a slaver group that operated outside the reach of most planetary laws. They were brutal, efficient, and they never took prisoners by mistake. They knew who she was. They knew who he was. And they took her anywhere. Rex stood still for a long moment, the wind pulling at his coat, his fists clenched tightly at his sides. He closed his eyes, not in sadness, but in silence. In a moment of calm before the storm, he knew this day might come, and deep down he had prepared for it, though he had hoped it would never be real. Now it was, and the man he once was began to return. He walked back to the house, each step filled with a new kind of weight. He went straight to the cellar and unlocked the hidden floor beneath the storage crates. The lights flickered on, revealing weapons sealed in vault's armor, still scarred from old battles, and a case with a symbol burned into the metal lid. He opened it slowly, and inside was a photo of Lena when she was younger, smiling with paint on her face. Beside it was his war gear, heavy black and silver, with the insignia of the Earth Legion, a force that no longer existed, but whose soldiers were never forgotten. He suited up with careful precision, the way he once had every morning before a mission. His hands moved fast, as if no time had passed, as if the blood of war had never left his veins. And once he was done, he stared into the mirror. The reflection was not of a farmer, not of a father, but of the man the galaxy had once feared more than death itself. He activated the old cum beacon and sent out a coded message to an old friend named Yano, a tracker who owed him more than one life. Yano would know where the Black Fang ships were heading, and he would talk, because no one ever refused Rex, not if they wanted to keep breathing. Outside, the wind howled louder, and the stars above seemed to burn brighter, as if they too knew what had been awakened and what would follow. Rex stepped into the cockpit of his old warship, hidden beneath the barn. The Ember Wolf roared back to life after all these years, engines burning blue and hungry and ready for war. As The ship lifted off the ground and climbed into the sky. Rex sat at the controls, eyes fixed forward, his voice calm and steady as he spoke just one line to the empty air. "I am coming, Lena," and the galaxy trembled. The ember Volf tore through the stars like a beast, unleashed, hungry, and determined, its engines growling with old fury that had slept for far too long. Inside the cockpit, Rex sat still, eyes locked on the glowing map before him, each red dot marked a possible jump route taken by the Black Fang ships, and each second passing was another second too long away from Lena. He had tracked enemies before, he had hunted warlords across burning worlds and crushed rebellions with nothing but strategy and steel, but this time it was different. This time it was personal. His first stop was the outlaw station known as Drift Point, a floating scrapyard filled with mercenaries, scavengers, and exiles. No law ruled, their only power and currency and fear. As Rex walked through the shadowed halls of the station, every eye turned to him, some filled with curiosity, others with panic, and a few with quiet recognition. Whispers spread fast. The Reaper had returned. The name they had tried to bury in silence was now walking again. He moved with purpose through the smoke-filled corridors until he reached a rusted bar in the lower levels where a man named Yano waited behind a steel table, nursing a drink with trembling hands. Yano had once been a tracker, a good one, until he crossed paths with Rex years ago and lost half his crew and nearly his life. Rex did not come for apologies. He came for information, and Yano knew better than to lie. Yano looked up, his voice cracking slightly as he spoke. "You always come when things go bad, don't you?" And Rex replied in a quiet voice, "They took my daughter, and I want to know where they're going now." For a moment, Yano said nothing. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out a dataship, sliding it across the table. "Word is they're moving her through the Rethan Belt. They've been buying up protection from rogue fleets out there, and using ghost signals to hide their trail. But someone like you won't have trouble finding them. You never do." Rex nodded once, picked up the chip, and turned to leave, but Yano called out, "One more thing, Gravik has eyes in the belt. He'll hear you coming, and if you're going after them, you better be ready to burn everything down." Rex didn't answer because he already planned to do just that. Back aboard the Ember Wolf, he loaded the dataship and locked onto the signal pattern, then engaged the jump drive. The ship groaned under the pressure as space bent around it and stars blurred into lines of light. Ahead, the Rethan Belt appeared like a graveyard of broken ships and shattered moons, spinning slowly in a chaotic dance. It was a place where pirates thrived and law vanished, but Rex had no fear, only focus. He scanned the sector and found something unusual, a freighter broadcasting a false ID code, one that matched the pattern used by Black Fang vessels without waiting for clearance. He charged directly toward it, weapons armed and shields raised. The freighter tried to flee, but Rex was faster. The Ember Wolf latched onto with magnetic grips and tore open its side with a precision cannon blast. Inside, chaos erupted. Mercenaries shouted and scrambled for weapons, but Rex moved through them like a shadow, fast and cold and unstoppable. Each step was a strike, each breath a decision. He didn't waste time on speeches or warnings. He was there to find answers and nothing else. One of the crew begged for mercy and pointed him to the ship's central archive where recent coordinates were stored. Rex spared him, but only barely. From the archive, he downloaded the location of a transit hub, a small hidden base used by the Black Fang to move prisoners off record. It was buried inside a hollow asteroid, deep in the belt, hard to find and harder to reach, but that didn't matter. He had the route, and he had the fire to burn through anything in his way. As he prepared to leave, a faint signal flickered on his monitor, weak and broken, but familiar it was. Lena, her voice strained and full of static, calling for help, trying to send coordinates. Rex froze for a second, then adjusted the signal frequency and traced the pulse. She was alive, and she was trying to escape even now, even while surrounded by enemies. It filled him with something deeper than rage. It was something stronger, something colder. A promise: "You held on just long enough, I'm coming." Left the broken freighter drifting in silence behind him and set course for the hidden base. The Ember Wolf howled louder than ever, lights blazing. Across the dark sky and inside Rex sat alone, eyes forward, hands firm on the controls, his mind replaying. Every second of that signal, every sound of her voice, every beat of fear and hope. Meanwhile, Lena sat in a cold metal cell, her hands bruised from trying to break, the lock, her eyes sharp as she studied the guard's routine she had found a way into. The comm system by rewiring the panel near her bed, and it sent a short burst out into space. It was all she could do now. She waited and watched, knowing her father was out there, and if he was coming, then nothing in the galaxy could stop him. Not walls, not guns, not warlords, not armies, she whispered softly to herself. Hold on, Dad. Please hurry. Back in space, the Ember Wolf approached the asteroid base, and Rex prepared to land. The outer defenses came online, turrets spinning and drones lifting into position. A voice crackled through the speaker, warning him to turn back or be destroyed. But Rex didn't turn. He powered the engines forward and launched countermeasures. While weaving through the enemy fire, the ship rocked but held steady, and within moments he breached the outer wall and docked directly into the base's spine. The moment the hatch opened, Rex stepped out, his weapons ready, his eyes locked on the path ahead, and every soul inside the base who saw him knew instantly that death had come to their doorstep. The trail of fire had begun. Smoke rose from the broken steel walls of the asteroid base as Rex moved through the wreckage like a force of nature, leaving nothing untouched. His footsteps echoed through the burning corridors where bodies lay motionless and alarms screamed in panic. Those who tried to stop him were already gone, and those who saw him coming ran in fear, because they knew what he was and what he had come for, and no one wanted to be in his way. He reached the command chamber where the Black Fang overseer had tried to hide behind locked doors and armed guards, but the doors were now twisted and broken, and the guards no longer breathed. The overseer sat in the corner, his hands shaking, his mouth trying to form words, but Rex spoke first, his voice calm and cold, like ice pressed against skin. Where is she? The overseer stumbled and pulled out a data tablet. He placed it on the table and stepped back, muttering that the girl had already been transferred to another location. She had been sold to a powerful warlord, someone with more credits than conscience, a man who collected rare slaves from across the stars. His name was Gravik, and he controlled part of the Iran cluster where no law dared to enter. Rex stared at the name on the screen for a long moment. He remembered Gravik from the old war days back then. Gravik was a minor player, just another pirate with too many ships and not enough discipline, but now he was more dangerous, more protected and more cruel. His fortress was hidden behind fleets of mercenaries and political shields, and anyone who tried to reach him never returned. But Rex was not anyone, and failure was not something he accepted. He downloaded the coordinates and left the base without another word. The Ember Wolf took off once more and disappeared into the black sky, leaving behind silence and smoke and the memory of Firin, the heart of the Iran cluster. Gravik stood in a marble hall surrounded by armed guards and golden statues, watching the stars through a massive glass window. His face was scarred, his voice deep and slow as he spoke to his advisors. He held a drink in one hand and a tracking device in the other, and he smiled when he saw the blip moving closer through the outer systems. So the ghost returns, he said. The deadliest human in the galaxy comes for his child, and they all nodded, some in fear, some in doubt. One guard asked if they should prepare the defenses. Gravik laughed and crushed the glass in his hand. Let him come. This fortress was built for war, and no man has ever broken through. But even as he said those words, he ordered every gate locked, every cannon activated, and every ship in orbit placed on alert. He was arrogant, but not foolish. He had heard the stories too, and he knew what kind of storm was approaching. Back on the Ember Wolf, Rex studied the map of Gravik's territory and began to plan each step, each move like a puzzle of fire and precision. He did not rush because he knew that a mistake could cost him more than his own life. He was no longer fighting for survival. He was fighting for blood, for family, and for the only thing left in the universe that gave him peace. He contacted Yano again, sending him a brief message, encrypted and direct. I need a backdoor into the fortress. Yano replied within minutes with a hidden supply tunnel used by smugglers. that led deep inside the base. It would be heavily guarded, but it was his best chance, and Rex accepted it without hesitation. Meanwhile, Lena sat in a luxurious prison, far from comfort. The room was lined with rich furniture and false kindness, but the guards at her door reminded her that she was not a guest. She was a prize, a trophy waiting to be displayed in Gravik's twisted collection. She had tried to escape once and been punished for it. Now her wrists were bruised and her eyes filled with quiet fire. She was not broken, not yet, and each night she stared at the stars and whispered that her father would come inside the fortress. Gravik prepared for the arrival of the one man he feared, but would never admit he feared. He called together his commanders and assigned them to different levels of the fortress, each with full authority to kill on sight. And yet, even with all the power surrounding him, he could not shake the feeling that something unstoppable was drawing closer. And it was Rex, arrived in the dead of night, hidden beneath the black cloak of asteroid dust, his ship silent and his weapons primed. He entered the fortress through the smuggler's tunnel as planned, cutting through steel doors and enemy patrols with the skill of a ghost. He left no sound, no sign, only the cold silence of death in his wake. Every step brought him closer to Lena. Every corridor filled him with the memory of her smile and the warmth of her voice, and it sharpened his rage until it became something else. Something deeper, something harder than steel. He reached the inner levels where Gravik's elite guards waited, fully armed and ready, but they were not prepared for Rex. Not really. Their training meant nothing against his instincts. Their numbers meant nothing against his purpose. He moved like a storm, a shadow, a fire in human form, and within minutes the walls were painted with defeat, and the doors ahead stood opening, a chamber lined with crystal and gold. Lena sat tied to a chair, her head tilted slightly as she heard the distant sound of fighting. Her heart began to race, her breath caught in her chest, and for the first time in days, she felt hope. Something was coming, something powerful and familiar. The door burst open, and there he stood, covered in smoke and shadow, his armor shining under the red lights of the chamber. His face calm and hard and cold, and when she saw him her eyes filled with tears. But she did not cry. She smiled and said, "I knew you'd come." Rex walked to her and cut the ropes gently, his hands shaking slightly. For the first time in years, his voice was soft as he said, "I'm sorry I'm late." She looked up at him and whispered, "It doesn't matter, you're here." And somewhere deep in the fortress, Gravik stared at the security feed and saw the impossible unfolding. His guards fallen, his walls breached, and the Reaper standing tall with fire in his eyes. Gravik stepped back, fear rising in his chest as he reached for his communicator, but it was already too late. Rex was coming, and nothing would survive. The alarm bells rang across the fortress like angry cries in the wind. Red lights flashed across walls carved from dark stone and steel. Panic began to spread as news traveled faster than sound. The Reaper was inside the walls, and he had reached the inner chambers. Commanders screamed into radios, calling for reinforcements, but their voices were drowned by the echo of explosions as one defense after another failed under the weight of the unstoppable man who had come not for conquest, not for justice, but for blood. Rex stood beside Lena in the chamber of crystal and fire, his eyes scanning the walls, his ears catching every sound. He handed her a sidearm, one she had used before when she trained on the farm. Just a small pistol, but enough for defense. She looked at him and nodded without words, because words were no longer needed. They had been separated by distance and pain, but now they were one again, and they would fight together. He opened the blast door and stepped into the hall lined with Gravik's elite fighters. They stood with polished weapons and advanced armor, waiting for the order to strike. But before they could speak, Rex moved forward like lightning. His rifle roared, and his hand struck with precision, every move calculated and clean. Lena stayed close behind, moving as he taught, her eyes sharp, breathing steady, heart full of fire. She was no longer a prisoner. She was his daughter, and the blood of the Reaper flowed in her veins. They moved through the fortress one level at a time. Enemies fell before them like broken statues. Some tried to run, others begged, but mercy had no place here. Not after what they did, not after what they stole from him. Each room they cleared brought them closer to the command center and closer to Gravik, who now hid deep in the core chamber, protected by thick walls and fear outside. The fortress Gravik's ship circled nervously the commanders aboard. Unsure of whether to attack or retreat, the station was losing power the inner cameras had. All gone dark, except one feed still working, the cracked lens showing Rex and Lena. Walking through smoke and rubble together, one by one the ships began to drift away from the station, choosing survival over loyalty because they knew they could not face what Gravik had provoked inside the chamber. Gravik stood beside his private guards, his face pale, his hands shaking. As he loaded his rifle, he tried to tell himself he was ready, that the legends were lies, that no man could destroy a fortress built to survive wars. But even as he spoke these things to himself, his eyes betrayed the truth, and fear choked his breath, because the sound of footsteps was getting louder, closer, deeper each second, more real. Lena spotted the control room door first and took position behind cover. Rex joined her, checking the explosive charges he had taken from the lower vaults. The door was strong, but nothing was unbreakable, especially when rage fueled the hands that placed the bombs. He set the charges in silence and motioned for Lena to hold tight. The timer began to tick, and the world slowed around them, each second stretching like glass, ready to shatter. Then the blast came, and the steel melted away, and the fire rushed through the hallway. The force shook the walls and threw Gravik and his men off balance before they could recover. Rex and Lena were inside, and the fight began. Blades clashed and guns fired. The room turned into chaos, but Rex was a storm untamed. Every shot he fired found its mark. Every strike he delivered broke bone and armor alike. Beside him, Lena moved with sharp grace, covering his flanks and watching his back. They were not father and daughter in that moment. They were warriors bound by love and fury, and nothing could break them. Gravik tried to run, but Rex caught him before he reached the escape hatch. He slammed him against the wall and stared into his eyes. The warlord sneered and tried to speak, tried to explain, tried to lie, but Rex did not want words. He wanted silence and truth and justice. He looked at Lena and stepped back, letting her make the choice. The room went quiet. The guards were gone. Only Gravik remained, his eyes wide with confusion and fear. Lena walked forward slowly, her hands steady, her voice clear and strong. "You took me from my home. You tried to break me. You failed." She raised the pistol and pulled the trigger, not out of hate, but out of strength. Gravik fell, and the war ended. They stood in the chamber, breathing heavy, covered in ash and sweat, but whole. The fortress around them still burned, but they were untouched by the flames. They had survived not just the battle, but the storm that tried to break them, and in that silence they found peace. Rex touched Lena's shoulder, and she looked at him with tired eyes full of tears and pride. He said nothing, only nodded, and together they walked out of the broken chamber into the corridor of smoke and light, where the Ember Wolf waited on the landing pad like a loyal beast, watching over its masters. As they entered the ship, the engines powered up and the systems came to life. The screens lit with star maps and navigation paths, but all Rex cared about was the small blinking light in the corner, the one that marked home. Lena sat beside him in the co-pilot seat and smiled, her voice soft and full of warmth. "I missed this." He looked at her and replied, "So did I." They left the fortress behind as it collapsed into itself, no longer a place of fear, but a grave for the wicked. The stars welcomed them back like old friends, and the silence of space wrapped around them like a calm breath. Galaxy had changed, but so had they, and from now on, they would face it together, side by side, heart to heart. The fire in the Iran cluster had ended, but their story was not yet finished. The Ember Wolf glided through the stars like a silent shadow, no longer in pursuit, but heading home. The war behind them, the fire burned out, and the long path of destruction left in silence. Rex sat at the controls, his hands calm, his eyes fixed ahead, but his mind still held the echoes of the screams, the battles, the choices that brought him here. Beside him, Lena sat quietly, watching the stars slip past the window. She felt the bruises on her arms and the ache in her bones, but inside her chest there was something stronger than pain, something bright and warm that had not died even when she was trapped. The galaxy had changed since they left home. Whispers traveled faster than ships' voices. From every system repeated the same story, that the Reaper had returned, that the Black Fang Syndicate was no more, that Gravik, the warlord of Iran, had fallen to the fury of a father who crossed burning systems to save his child. Some believed the story, others denied it. Some called it legend, some called it warning, but all of them knew it had happened, and that fear had taken a new shape when they reached Vetra 9. The planet looked the same as when they had left, the sun still painted gold. Across the fields, the wind still carried the smell of dust and flowers, and the little house still stood strong among the trees, as if it had waited for them patiently. Without question, Rex powered down the ship and walked with Lena across the old path, their boots pressing gently against the soft soil, their shadows stretching long behind them. Inside the house, everything was untouched. The lights flickered on with a soft hum. The table still had the old plates from the meal they never finished. And the photo of the two of them still stood on the shelf, smiling back at the ones who had changed so much but still found their way. Back home, Lena sat on the steps just like he used to, her eyes searching the quiet sky, her voice light and peaceful. "I thought I would never see this place again." He stood behind her, hands on her shoulders, and said, "I never stopped looking, no matter where they took you. I was always coming." She smiled, not because the pain was gone, but because the hope had won. She had seen fear, she had seen darkness, but in the end she saw her father standing between her and the fire, and nothing would ever take that away from her. News of their return spread beyond the stars, hidden broadcasts, encrypted messages, whispers among bounty hunters and mercenaries told of the man who brought down a syndicate alone. Some wanted revenge, some wanted to forget, but most chose silence because they knew what happened to those who crossed that line. Again, Rex received a message from the Unified Planetary Council. They offered him a title, a place in their security force, a medal for bravery, but he did not reply. He had no interest in politics or praise. His war was over, and medals would never mean more than the smile of his daughter Jono. Sent one final message. It was short and clear: the Black Fang is gone. The remnants are scattered. The ones who survived have changed names and vanished. They won't rise again, not with your name still spoken across space. Rex deleted the message and looked at Lena, who was now helping rebuild the old garden, pulling weeds, fixing the broken fences, and planting new seeds, not because she had to, but because it made her feel alive again. She asked him one day if he would teach her how to fight, not with rage, but with purpose, not to destroy, but to protect. He agreed, not with words, but by placing a training blade in her hand and guiding her movements in the quiet fields. Under the light of twin suns, he watched her grow stronger, not just in skill but in heart, and that gave him more peace than any battle ever had. One morning they sat on the hill watching the sunrise, the sky painted in red and gold, the wind soft and cool. She asked him what happens now. He looked at the horizon and said, "We live, we remember, and we wait for no one to tell us what we are." She nodded and leaned her head on his shoulder. They watched the sun climb higher together, the silence between them full of understanding, no promises, no regrets, only peace. Far away in the depths of forgotten systems, others heard the story and feared the name, but some were inspired. Some saw not a killer, but a father who refused to break, who refused to kneel, who burned through galaxies, not for power, but for love, and they called it the story of the man who hunted gods for the life of one girl. The legend of the Reaper had changed. It was no longer just blood and death, it was fire and heart, and the bond between two souls that nothing could break. And so the galaxy moved on. Stars turned, planets spun, and ships flew across the black sky, chasing war and wonder. But on a small green world at the edge of known space, a father and daughter lived quietly, rebuilding their home, growing their roots, and walking under the open sky. They did not need to be remembered. They did not ask to be feared. They had already won, not through vengeance, but through survival, not through glory, but through love. The reckoning had ended. Peace had finally begun. The end